I will now ask Hilary and Mallory a couple of questions. And the first one, you really touched on it quite a bit. So if you don't mind, just maybe repeat. As we heard earlier today, the increasing rate of change in our climate and environment results in slower adaptation and therefore disappearance of many species. The statistic of 73% of species that have gone extinct since 1970 is daunting. These gaps or niche create opportunities because, as we know, voids get filled. My question is, how have each of you seen these niche get filled to hopefully restore ecosystems? And I know you've already touched on these. And
yeah, I wanted to talk on a niche opportunity, and that is, and I'll just back up a little bit by saying, we talked about the population growth and the pressure that places on the Florida Wildlife Corridor. In addition to sea level rise, in that same time period, 2070, there's predicted that 900,000 Floridians will have to move from the coast elsewhere. And so that, when you put the 1,000 people a day and the 900,000 moving from the coast, that is tremendous pressure to the middle, which is largely where the Florida Wildlife Corridor is. And so increased habitat fragmentation increases roadkill directly on our roads. And we think about over the last couple of decades, there have been hundreds of panthers and bears that have been killed on Florida's roads. And so one of these niche opportunities is continuing to increase the number and locations of wildlife underpasses. Or now we've started construction on the first overpass in the state of Florida, which is exciting, but they're normally underpasses. And these are really important locations to reduce that roadkill. And it's been shown that when combined wildlife underpasses with fencing, that there's a 90 plus reduction in roadkill in those places. And so it works. And we're talking about the large species, but it is also available for all species to use. And the photo monitoring now shows us that, which is great, all the species that use these crossings. So these are niche and they're important for connecting habitat types. You can connect wetlands to uplands. You can have movement corridors that can connect the ecological hubs, and they allow that genetic exchange that's important, and also the movement of species over time, both plants and animals. So something we didn't talk much about today, but I wanted to make sure I got in the conversation.
Well, I'm going to start by saying the important thing about niche protection is protecting the last of what you have. I mean, clearly where you have intact ecosystems, that is the priority, and to make sure that they're well managed and protected. But how do you think beyond that? One thing that's really changed in Florida in the last 30, 40 years is the real recognition that a huge part of our landscape is actually not in these pristine ecosystems. They're working lands, they're ranches, they're timberlands, and the sort of growing coalition between those managing those lands and those engaged in conservation has been one of the most encouraging parts of success in conservation. In other words, we have recognized the niche, it's a very large niche, we're talking millions of acres, much of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, is working lands. And working lands are where a lot of our remaining biodiversity is. And it might not be run or managed the way we typically think of when we go to a state park, but they're extraordinarily important. So I would say big niche opportunity, working lands. The other one is we are in an era of restoration in Florida. You just need to look. We have lost half of our citrus groves in Florida. This is a devastating tragedy from a conservation point of view, as well as from an agricultural point of view. Those lands were the lands that buffered beautiful areas. Those are the lands that didn't mind if you lit a prescribed fire next to them because they weren't going to complain. Our loss of citrus has been staggering. And I think for those in the citrus industry, one citrus grower said to me a year ago, you told me, Hilary, 25 years ago that this industry could be wiped out by a disease, and I laughed at you. And he said, I'm sorry to say you were right. And that recognition of the vulnerability of, an enormous part of Florida. So the real question is, how do we restore those lands? The last crop is concrete. That's Stephen Small invented that phrase, not me. But how do we not change those all to, they're just sitting, waiting for development? What are alternative crops? What are alternative restoration techniques? Those growers are just sitting almost shell-shocked at the minute as to what the next step is. It's such a daunting problem for them. For the existing groves, huge investment in, I'm sorry to say, pesticides to control citrus greening. For those that have given up, it's, selling on to the nearest bidder. So I would say that's a huge challenge for us. And restoration is often creating new niches in Florida. We can't always create old ecosystems. How can we create function without necessarily having to really replicate an existing niche? Where is it we need function? Where do we need, some kind of ecosystem services without necessarily having to completely fabricate something that looks like a wonderful painting of an ecosystem that exists?
Fair enough. Great answers. Mallory and Hilary, as you know, I share your passionate commitment for our natural world. And as you know, I sit on both of your boards. But I am not a scientist, and many people aren't. However, but what do you both see as the role, current and future, of amateurs or citizen scientists in your respective organizations?
Well, I'm going to let Hilary talk about citizen science, and I'm going to talk a little bit about citizen engagement, because I think there's such a role for citizens to be involved in the protection of the Florida Wildlife Corridor and protecting this climate refugia for the state. And one of the things that I think citizens can do, and they often don't realize that they have this power, but you can help prevent sprawl. And that is hugely important for preventing habitat fragmentation. And so those decisions are made here locally, and they're made every day, and they're made by people who show up and speak up at meetings. So that's important. And you can also help accelerate conservation. And I mentioned, one of the things we have to do is to protect more land in the corridor faster, and that will shape the future of what our development looks like, because we will have already put in permanent protection a lot of those places. And so just here locally, Sarasota County 25 years ago adopted the Environmental Sensitive Lands Protection Program through a ballot initiative. That's just having an important anniversary this year, but it's actually up for either renewal or reauthorization next year. And so there are voting actions that citizens can take that help increase funding for land conservation, that helps accelerate the pace of conservation in the corridor. So those are the two things I would say to get involved with, in addition to the 10, help prevent sprawl and help accelerate the pace of conservation.
It's very interesting talking about citizen science, because in some aspects, people think citizen science is what's good for citizens. It's actually good for science. It's scientists that need the science information that the citizens are collecting. So sure, those of you who are on eBird, you can get your checklists and everything. It's super fantastic. I've seen this many species in my backyard. This is my county list. This is my nationwide list, however obsessive you want to be. But those data have transformed our understanding of bird migration and bird conservation in this country. I mean, in Florida, we have Lake Watch, where people go and they collect the data for their own lake. Yes, we have a few lakes like Lake Annie and Archbold that are really well studied, but Lake Watch is where we get the real glug of data that we need to answer big questions about lakes in Florida. And a lot of that ties into global lake networks. So you can go and collect your sample in Florida, send it in, find out what's happening to your lake, which is, incidentally, often the driver for citizen science. They're not necessarily scientists. They're not necessarily like biodiversity, aficionados. They often just want to know what's happening here because it's affecting me. And that's the best way to get citizen scientists to do things. The minute someone says, I'm going to collect these data because it will actually affect me, is the best way to get the public engaged in citizen science, because they're really vested in the outcome of their own data, the outcome of the aggregated data. And it's such an avenue, and it's fantastic for science. I don't think, 30 years ago, I don't think scientists, we didn't trust the public, highly suspect of all of this. Complete rubbish. it's absolutely transformed science in many areas, and we should be applauding and lauding every single one of those citizen science programs. So go join a citizen science program, whichever one you love.
Well, I love participating in the Christmas bird count every year. We take a group of people to Mayaca State Park. I think it's on the first Monday of each December. And you know what? I know it's cliche, but you protect what you love. The more you know about something, you learn about it, then you want to protect it and care for it. Last question. To
0 minutes. Go on.
Has anything that you've learned today, Mallory and Hilary, enhanced your understanding of climate science and inspired you as leaders in your respective organizations?
Absolutely. I feel like today was so inspiring, and I'm just going to go back to the very first talk in Ken's opening presentation. There was some text above in light colors that said, everything matters. And in the corridor conservation world, we often say everything is connected. And I just last couple weeks ago came back from Ted Turner's Vermejo Park Ranch, and they have a bumper sticker slogan, which Ted Turner said in an interview once, which is stuck, which is save everything. And so when you put all those together, everything matters, everything is connected, and we need to save everything. I am more motivated than ever to save everything by accelerating the pace of conservation in the corridor so that we are holding this special place and keeping Florida wild for the future. And I was so inspired by so many of the examples from this afternoon, and especially by Pam's example of that, forestry planting shift and using climate adapted conservation planning. And we can do a better job in my organization and in the partners we work with to be really implementing those forward thinking solutions.
Okay, great. Do we have time for questions from the audience? No, we don't? Yes, no, maybe no.
Oh, I want to say one last thing.
Okay, well,
this whole conference has been a masterclass in communication. If I learned anything today that really impressed me, it was the quality of the communication. There were extraordinary talks, so I really wanted to thank all the speakers. And I think there's a message there for all of us. Clear, improved clarity of communication will actually make a difference and connect with the public. So thanks to everyone who did such a superb job.
Yeah, thank you to our two panelists, Mallory and Hilary. And Bob, thank you for putting this on
Thank you.
One more time. And thank you to all the speakers today and the whole audience, especially those who made it to the end.